some costumes shouldn't be worn for days, and some smiles aren't human. In tonight's video, we bring you two terrifying encounters: a roommate who refused to take off his cat in the hat costume, and a late-night walker who met a man that danced straight out of a nightmare. Let's begin. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance-walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward. Smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street, and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me. Still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper, "What the foo?" Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance-walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way. And this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. It was the 1st of November and he was still wearing it. Our party was on the 29th of October and it was funny then, hell, even on the 30th it still made me laugh. When I saw him occasionally creep out of his room to stock up on snacks from the kitchen. When I left the house for my 9 a.m. class on the 31st and he was sitting in the kitchen with his cat in the hat costume still on, well, then I began to worry. John was quiet at the best of times, not too many friends, and I wasn't a stranger to sitting in silence at meal times. This was different though. His unnerving smile was all I could really see of his face beneath the prosthetics and makeup. It didn't help that it was shitty homemade costume either. Visible stitching and discolored tufts of fur made it all the creepier. Our other flatmate had dropped out at the start of the semester, so it was just John and I for a long time. He wasn't an inherently weird guy before this either, quiet yes, but friendly enough. "Don't you have classes to go to?" I asked as I left for work on the 2nd. He silently shook his head, not looking up from the book he was reading. "Starting to get real fucking creepy round here, man," I muttered loud enough for him to hear as I shut the door behind me. "I like it," I heard John bark with venom from the driveway. It was the night of the 3rd when I finally cracked and phoned his sister. The white patches of the suit were beginning to yellow and there was an awful stench permeating around the house. She thought I was kidding at first, but after I explained in detail what had been going on the last few days, she went quiet. She assured me that he had been texting her regularly as he usually did but had never mentioned the costume. I'd known the guy for a little over a year by that point, but I really didn't know that much about him. His sister told me that he'd been obsessed with the Cat in the Hat movie after he'd seen it in the cinema when he was 8 or 9, but grew out of that phase pretty quickly. She assured me that she'd phone him and get to the bottom of whatever the hell was going on. It was the smell that woke me up, that's how pungent it was. "Don't meddle with my affairs," John said, standing in the doorway with a dim light behind him which partially illuminated that fucking costume. "What the hell, get out of here you freak," I shouted in a panicked daze. "Don't meddle with my affairs," he said again. His tone was calm but there was a definite aggression behind it. He lingered there for a few more seconds, a silent tension between us. It was one of the few times in my life I'd ever felt genuine terror as I gazed at that horrendous cat costume and my roommate beneath it. The next day in class I was going through my options in my head. My other friends had recommended calling the cops and that John was in need of some serious help. I didn't want to get him into some kind of trouble though, maybe even sectioned. My choice was made for me when 2 police detectives pulled me out of the lecture. They sat me down in the cafeteria with stern looks upon their faces. My first thought was that John had killed himself. I don't know why, but that made the most sense to me. I was dead wrong. "Why didn't you report that he was missing? Did you not find it odd for him not to come?" One quizzed me. He isn't missing. He should be there right now, probably still wearing that stupid costume." A dog walker had discovered John's naked body in the bushes not far from my house. The police reckoned he'd been dead since the night of the 29th. They never found anyone in the house during their search, only that tattered costume which had been neatly folded on top of my bed.